Hello everybody, I'm not Acerola, and here's how I just barely made something resembling Terraria in C++. About, I don't know ago, the one single brain cell in my head hit the corner like a DVD logo, and a thought occurred to me. I should learn C++, or C#, but I chose C++. In hindsight, C# is better for making video games, and in the future I am gonna make video games in C#. Let me know how to do that if you know, by the way. But anyways, you might be asking, why even make video games? You won't make anything special. And to that I agree. I'm never gonna surpass the likes of Cory in the House for Nintendo DS, The Legend of Zelda CDI, or Skibidi Toilet for Android and iOS, but I can at least get close to the quality of the games I'm copying. I started just by downloading SFML and installing the right packages to the right places. Basic beginner stuff, but it took me a while to get it figured out without breaking my laptop. I eventually got the basic setup window open. Shut up, I'm not gonna go onto the website just to recreate this shot. And I started programming. Really early on, after my world gen but before the block editing, I was having trouble with rendering my world in a decent time. At first I was doing a draw call for each rectangle on the screen, but eventually I decided to just make one big image with each block as the pixels, which would also make a map screen easier since I could just use the same texture, but that was also running slow. So I went onto the SFML forums and had a several day long back and forth with this really smart and helpful guy who's practically coded half of my game for me, and by the end of it I had tried like 5 different methods and every attempt ran slower than the last. So at this point I was about to give up, and I'd optimized my map code to about as far as it could go. I'd given up using textures for my blocks even, a change that still lingers today, but nothing worked. It was then that I realized, after days of spending this poor man's time, that I had put the code I drew my map inside in the loop that updated my map. So instead of rendering my map once per frame, I was rendering it several hundred times per frame. Moving that one line of code sped up my game from 5 FPS to way past 60. After making my map generation and display code, I whipped up some simple movement code just to look around the world, added some extra FX to blocks to spice up the visuals a little, and I got to work on the actual player movement. I'm gonna go kinda in depth here, so skip to the timestamp on screen if you suck and hate being smart and learning and stuff. But anyways, to make the proper collision for my player, I needed to know what blocks were around my player, and to know what blocks were around my player, I decided to check only several points, dividing flooring and then multiplying the position to get the index position of the list my map was stored as to get the block. I could store these blocks as some true and false statements, or bools, and use those bools later for collision. Since I know that every block is the same size, and I know they're all axis aligned, and that they're all also perfectly positioned on the grid, I know that if there's a block below the player, I can always snap the player's position to the grid square above the block, and that's going to cleanly and efficiently solve collision with the floor. I just have to repeat this step for each the left, right, and upward directions, and that was collision, right? But the only problem was that it didn't work. It was glitchy and jumpy, and the player could clip through the corner of blocks, wall jump off of one side but not the other, and generally just glitch around. This was not a good solution for obvious reasons, so I just gave up for the day. I did nothing the entire day. The next day, however, I had a genius idea. Ketchilk. Ketchup mixed with milk. Think about it. I also thought of a new way to handle collisions. Lasers, well, technically rays, but they're pretty similar. Instead of checking points around my player, I'd raycast from my player in different directions, and if the distance from the player to the end of the raycast was smaller than some constant, the player was colliding with the block in that direction. I implemented this, and surprisingly, it worked perfectly on the first try. Now, the more skilled in video production of you might realize I'm not telling a very good story here. I've had 2 problems that have been resolved instantly with no suspense, and that's a good point, but on an unrelated note, where did your dad go? Seriously, both of these problems were solved pretty much instantly with one change. This is a quick intermission for those who skipped the time step. There was some really good content that you just skipped past, and I'm disappointed in you, really. Anyways, after I got those 2 things working, I spent an hour on structure generating and half an hour on making a tool in P5.js for making structure files. I never saved that tool, so now I don't have it anymore, and I'm gonna have to remake it once I want to add more structures, but I'm not working on those right now. I created an item class that stores all the properties for items, and in future iterations of this game I'm going to rework it to make it more clean and versatile and based and everything, but for the moment it works. I made a list for the inventory, which in hindsight is a dumb idea because it means the inventory can only ever be sorted. And I know how I'd remake this now, but I'm too lazy to refactor it at the moment, so I'm just gonna leave it until the next version. The inventory is very janky, so is everything else, but it works. I cannot say the same for everything else. After spending days adding the inventory and getting it to work at least somewhat smoothly, I had to add functions for each of the items. This took a long time because each item works differently and it comes with its own bugs. I spent a good long while trying to figure out why this sword wouldn't stop spinning, but once I had those functions done, I could finally start making the cool parts of the game, the enemies and the bosses. Now, the enemies were very simple. Flying enemies and worm enemies share the same AI, but with different properties and rendering methods, and fighters copy most of the player's code to move around. My favorite part about making these guys is the sprite work and the lore. There will be lore to this game, and I'd like to watch you guys piece it together playing through the game. I'm gonna try my best to include it in a way that gives the story, but still encourages different interpretations. Anyways. Every time I get to add a new boss or special enemy, I get to add a little bit more lore, and eventually it'll all build up to be a complete copy of Calamity lore with a few minor changes, because I love being original. The sprite work, however, is my absolute favorite part, until I look back on it later and realize that I'm not that good at art, or music, which is absolutely terrible. You're gonna have to play the game to hear it though. Got the first boss added, the Corrupted Automaton, but new bosses should be added pretty quickly until the game is done, since I have all the underlying systems done. Once my game is fully done, I'm gonna probably make a different game as a bit of a break, and then I'm gonna try and learn C# for the next iteration of this game. Fun fact, the game iteration is 3, the other 2 being made in JavaScript on my browser. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. Comment something funny down below to get the funny internet numbers up, and go take a shower.